Welcome to episode 6 of the Composer Spotlight series here on my channel, where it's just an excuse for me to talk to really awesome musicians and pick their brains and get to know the artist behind the music and what makes them tick. And today I'm really excited to be joined by Peter Longworth. He's been described as dazzlingly atmospheric by the Glasgow Herald. His music has been performed internationally in countries throughout North America and mainland Europe, as well as in UK venues such as Queen Elizabeth Hall, the Cadogan Hall, the Glasgow Royal Concert Hall, St. John Smith Square, and St. Martin in the Fields. Ensembles who have commissioned his work include the London Mozart Players, the Edinburgh Quartet, and the Hebrides Ensemble, and the National Youth Orchestra of Scotland. His music has been recorded by the Brno Philharmonic Orchestra for Ablaze Records and workshopped publicly by both the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra and the Royal Scottish National Orchestra. An alumnus of the London Philharmonic Orchestra's Young Composers Program and the RSNO Composers Hub, Peter studied composition with Mark Anthony Turnage at the Royal College of Music and with Matthew King at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama. A finalist in the 2014 Curious Composers Contest and the 2015 Philip Bates Composition Prize, Peter's work often draws on his strong affinity with Italian culture for inspiration. Peter is a professor at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama. Peter, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much indeed for having me. It's really, really good of you to have me on board.
So I've been asking this question to everybody who's been on the show so far, and how has your 2020 been? 2020 has really been a turning point for a lot of us professionally and personally. And so how are you, and how have you been able to spend the time in isolation fruitfully, creatively?
Yeah, I'm doing okay, thanks. I've been really lucky, and both the people I know for the most part, fortunately, which is great. I've also been fortunate, I think, during the past year to have had a few projects to keep me going compositionally. I've maybe been writing a little more in the way of music for solo instruments than I might otherwise have been doing, but that's a fantastic discipline, so it's been a fantastic opportunity to do that. And I've also been, as most of us, I think, just been doing plenty of things online in terms of teaching and the like. But yeah, no, it's been a tough year in many ways. Although I think that from a compositional point of view, at least, that the lack of traveling around has perhaps been conducive to being at the desk a little more. So it's perhaps been a slightly more productive year for me than might usually have been the case, actually.
So what I'm hearing is that you're maybe approaching composition a little bit more mindfully than you normally would. Is that apt to say?
Yeah, I mean, mindfully, I suppose, but just having more time at the piano, more time at the table. Often, when I'm traveling around to teach or whatever, I'll have a lot of ideas going round in the head, and I'll be sitting on trains and thinking while I'm moving around, and to be actually in a position where I can work more actively has been the big change for me, I think.
You've mentioned that you've been writing a lot of solo work, and you've also mentioned you've been doing a lot of online stuff. Have you been getting online performances of your work?
Yeah, I've really benefited from that side of things. I have to say, it's been amazing. Certainly, amongst my friends here in the UK, and I'm sure with you in the States as well, the amount of online content that has been being put up by performers who've just found a way to keep playing, and that's been amazing and very inspiring from my side of things. And so I wrote a solo violin work for a fantastic violinist called Emily Davis, who's an associate concertmaster of the Royal Scottish National Orchestra, who are based in Glasgow. So I wrote a piece for an online recital, which she did, and a few of my older pieces have been sort of wheeled out as well for various online things as well, and that's been quite nice to touch base with music that I haven't heard for a little while as well.
Have you always known that you were going to be a composer? Was there like if yes, was there a pivotal moment that you remember that put you on this path?
Well, not always. I guess like a lot of people in the UK, I wanted to be a professional soccer player. But that was never really on the cards. But no, I started playing trumpet when I would have been 8,
Oh, wow.
and yeah, I think I realized that music would be what I do. And I was really lucky growing up to be a member of the National Youth Orchestras of Scotland from about the age of 11, and playing in a really good youth orchestra setup where you'd get introduced to Mahler, Shostakovich, Walton. It was an amazing training as a musician. And as a trumpet player in particular, you're sitting around quite a lot in the rehearsal. A lot of counting rests at the best of times.
Mm-hmm.
To come in, but also just watching conductors rehearse various sections of the orchestra was really just really inspiring, really intriguing. And so I guess the idea that maybe I could write something of my own came then. And the other great thing about these youth orchestras was that we commissioned a lot of new work as well. So to be able to premiere pieces was really exciting. And I always felt that you get your part for third trumpet or whatever it was, and inside that part was something waiting to be discovered, a world, if you like. And so that first rehearsal where you heard this thing come to life for the first time was always really, really special, and something that I guess I wanted to be a part of from the other side. So I guess that's where it all kicked off in terms of wanting to be a composer. And I'd have started to compose when I was, I guess, 14, and writing pieces that were probably very ambitious and not very good. But it was just about getting started and trying to do this for myself.
Do you remember what your first piece was?
It was probably something entitled Symphony or something like that.
That is ambitious.
Yeah, it probably didn't get past a first movement. I was always kind of starting things, and it was that act of starting something that was exciting. And I guess the discipline of actually seeing something through to the end was something that I kind of developed a little bit later, I guess.
You mentioned that the youth orchestras they had people regularly commissioned to create new works. Do you remember like any of those particular pieces standing out to you?
I think the one that really stands out for me was a piece by the composer Thea Musgrave, who I believe has been based in the States for quite a long time now, though she's a Scottish composer, I think. And she wrote a percussion concerto for Colin Curry to play with the National Youth Orchestra of Scotland. And he was there at the rehearsals, and she was a lovely person. And I think I'd said to her, I'd have been 14, and I'd have said, "Oh, I want to be a composer." And every time she saw me on the course, she would be like, "Oh, you're the composer," which was really, really sweet, because of course I wasn't a composer, the word, but it was really lovely to see that composers existed. They were real people, and that was a piece that really, really stood out. I suppose I was at the age where I was also starting to understand a bit about how the piece was put together and to appreciate what was going on.
Speaking of understanding how a piece is put together, I'm really interested in music education. I teach a lot of different kinds of music, and it's so fascinating to me how music education is approached throughout the world. So I'm wondering, growing up in Scotland, going to London, studying in the UK in general, what do you think the strengths are of music education in the UK, and could you compare it to something that's equivalent in the States?
I don't really know perhaps enough about music education in the States to be able to comment confidently on that.
Okay.
And what I would say, I mean, you'll tell me where what the comparisons are, I guess, when I've told you my experience. But I'd say the strengths are a real diversity in musical output in the UK. So when I was studying at the Guildhall for my undergraduate, the way it worked was that each of the composition students would have their own principal study composition teacher. And then around that, every week we'd have classes with different teachers in, you know, everything from counterpoint to orchestration to Haydn string quartet pastiche writing to analysis and, you know, post-tonal harmony. And that breadth was quite amazing. And the teachers teaching it were all, you know, just wonderful composers in their own right, who all had their sort of very passionate take on what it was they were teaching. So I think that was my experience at the Guildhall. But I would say that I think each conservatoire in the UK has its own way of teaching and of doing things. So I think my experience at the Guildhall might not be comparative to somebody else's experience elsewhere. And certainly for my master at the Royal College, you know, it was a master's, so it was a different type of degree, but, you know, the setup was a little different there.
Mm-hmm. How much homework did you get? Do you remember?
I think a lot to kick off. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm sort of, you know, I'm teaching at the Guildhall now, and I kind of look back and think, wow, yeah, that is a lot of homework that's being dished out. And I guess you don't really notice when you're 18 or whatever. You just do it. And it was great actually though, because if you were having a bit of an issue in your own composition, you could say, okay, well, you know, I'll just do some counterpoint today or whatever. And, you know, that was great then in feeding back into your composition and getting you going again on that. So having a wide array of homework was often just a really helpful thing creatively, which of course was its point.
Right. I think it's really funny because I just spoke with another composer, Thomas Lavoie, who studied at the University of Aberdeen, I think, and he was commenting that comparatively from his studies in there and back in the U.S., like they barely gave any homework at all. So I thought that was really amusing. So I just figured I'd ask you.
It sounds like maybe we're getting off lightly over here.
You mentioned some of your early, some of your interactions with some really high-level composers early in your life. Could you talk about some other musical inspirations that really made a huge impact on you? And I always ask for like a top 5 or a top 10, and people hate me for that question. But could you make a list of people who really inspire you?
Yeah, I'll have a go at making a list. I don't know if it will equate to 5 or 10. It will probably fall annoyingly in the middle. I hope that's not a pain. I guess the figure that I go to always is Ravel. Ravel is a massive influence and inspiration on me. Obviously, we can talk all day about how good the orchestration is, and we should talk about how good the orchestration is. But I think that he's just a wonderful composer in all aspects of music. A brilliant melodist, harmonically inventive, and a very poetic composer. The thing I love about Ravel is the way that the music is the man, that his heritage and his interests are all there in the work. And so I've always been very drawn to him. And to sort of expand the list outwards a bit, I think that period, that early 20th century group of composers working in Paris have been really important to me. Stravinsky, you know, Debussy, and also Poulenc as well. I think Poulenc's often a very undervalued composer, but is the kind of composer who can make you laugh and cry within the space of a short piece, and that's no mean feat. So what are we? We're at, I guess, what's that? 4.
Sounded like yeah, 4, yeah.
I guess, you know, still remaining, you know, in the past, I guess a 5th person to add there would be, going a bit further back, would be Domenico Scarlatti. And I'm a big admirer of his, you know, of his keyboard sonatas, and the fact that within such concise form, there's so much depth and there's so much invention. And I think that's just a really important thing for me personally. I also like writing quite concise forms, and those pieces I think are just, they're evidence that you can say a lot in 3 minutes. You can say as much in 3 minutes as you can potentially in half an hour if you do those 3 minutes right. And so I'm a great admirer of Scarlatti. And in terms of, you know, more recent people, obviously, you know, my teachers have been incredibly important for me. I've been really, you know, blessed with the teachers I've had, I think, throughout my life. At the Guildhall, I was a fantastic composer by the name of Matthew King, whose music, I would, suggest that anybody checks out. And Matthew's a really, good friend of mine now. But he was always about teaching in a way that accentuated the inventiveness. It was always about doing what you wanted to do, but doing it in a way which was as imaginative as possible. It was always about looking for the fun in and that's there in his music. So his music has been important to me, and so too has the music of Mark Anthony Turnage, and that's music that's just wonderfully written, and for orchestra in particular. And so these are figures that are important for me. But I suppose just going back a little further in my life, I guess when I was growing up, I had an idea of what contemporary music was. And I wasn't sure that I could do that because I wanted to write quite melodic music, and I wasn't sure if that was allowed. And when I heard John Adams for the first time, when I heard Chairman Dances, that was a moment that really ignited something for me, and that led me also to listen to a lot of other American composers. I'm a trumpet player, of course, so it's natural that I go and listen to Wynton Marsalis, and I'm a big admirer of his work. And more recently, a composer by the name of Melinda Wagner, who I believe is a Pulitzer Prize-winning composer, absolutely incredible composer with a really, really distinctive voice, I think, and a great integrity in what she does. So maybe that's around 10.
Yeah, that's a great list. That's a great list. Thank you so much. You mentioned in your bio about an Italian influence, and I wonder if you could talk more about that. I mean, you talked about Scarlatti, but what is it about Italian culture that sort of draws you in?
Well, I'm married to an Italian. That's something
that
I
does
should
help.
say. So obviously, there's a bias, but as a result of that, I've been lucky to spend a lot of time in Italy and learning a language and becoming part of a culture through her family has been really important on me creatively, because in Italy there's a real sense that ritual is important. There's an appreciation of small things and of taking the time to do small things well. And so that's something that's impacted a little bit on my approach to writing, I think. But also the sounds that surround me when I'm in Italy are really influential upon my music. So when I'm there, I record a lot of church bells. I record a lot of insect song. Where I stay when I'm in Italy is it's in Tuscany in the countryside, which is beautiful. It's very idyllic, and always every time of day you've got this constant soundtrack of insects in the background, and so that has sort of seeped into my music over time. And so when I have the opportunity to pick a topic for a piece, more often than not, that's where I drift off to, and it's really, I think, opened up different avenues for me as a composer.
So your music has spanned a wide spectrum of styles, but in particular, you're quite prolific with chamber music. And I'm wondering, what is it about chamber music that keeps you coming back? And is there a particular instrumentation that you prefer above all else?
Well, I suppose the chamber music. The thing I like about chamber music is its conversational possibility. I love the fact that there's a real interactive quality amongst chamber musicians. I love working with chamber musicians. I feel that when you're in the rehearsal room, you can have a really meaningful dialogue with a group of 4 or 6 players, and you can feel that you're really developing a nice relationship. And that's something that really appeals to me, because composing is obviously quite a solitary task very often. So to be able to write something and then take it to people and discuss it with them is wonderful. But I suppose even when I'm writing for orchestra, which I very much enjoy doing, I've had people tell me, "Oh, you've just written a big chamber piece."
Huh.
I guess there's something about that sense of interplay that really appeals to me. And I value that.
So if you were to pick one ensemble that you would have to be forced to write for the rest of your life, what would that be?
Goodness.
Is that an impossible question?
It's difficult. Yeah, I mean, when I was starting out as a composer, because I was a trumpet player, I actively didn't want to write for trumpet. I wanted to get away from that as much as possible. And I found myself writing for a lot of other things. And now I suppose I feel like I'm more comfortable. I've found my way back to the trumpet. So I've written a few chamber pieces recently for trumpets. I wrote a work for trumpet quartet a couple of years ago that I'm very proud of. And I think, being a trumpet player has helped in just knowing the timbres in a very detailed way. But in terms of an ensemble to be stuck with, that's a really horrible question.
Sorry.
I think what I would say is that I'd ask not to be stuck with an ensemble. I love the fact that in working to commission, you're often given lineups that you don't expect.
Mm-hmm.
Lineups that might be slightly unusual at first glance. So a piece I wrote a while ago, a piece called Nocturne Masquerade, written for the Hebrides Ensemble. The instrumentation is flute, harp, piano, violin, viola, and cello. And the reason for that instrumentation is that the rest of the program, which had already been decided, used those instruments in various combinations, and they wanted a piece that tied everything together. So I got this amazing sextet. It's a beautiful combination of instruments, but not necessarily one that I'd have come to on my own. So I really like being given scenarios that I then have to respond to compositionally, because I think that brings you out of yourself and you have to become more creative to fulfill the brief.
We're talking about writing music. I love to hear about how different composers approach the act of composition. What's your process like? Do you find that you have like a set list of things that you have to do for every piece? Are you constantly trying to reinvent the wheel with every piece? Like, what do you think? What's your process like?
Well, as I mentioned before, I'm a big fan of ritual. I love the idea of ritual, and a teacher of mine a few years ago recommended a book called Daily Rituals. I don't know if you read it, but it's basically a collection of the working habits of composers, painters, authors, and that was really fascinating for me. And I decided that I would have to kind of have quite a structured day myself as a composer. So I tend to get up about 6:30 and try and just get the non-compositional stuff for the day done as far as possible. And just every day, hopefully, whenever I can, I'm writing in the morning and then just after lunch. And then in the evening, I'm teaching or whatever. So having a sort of schedule has been helpful for me. And in terms of the writing process itself, I think often when you're writing to commission, you'll have a theme that is requested of you, whether that's an extra musical theme or a piece that you're needing to respond to rather, or be inspired by. And that can be helpful to have an overarching theme. So I'll immediately sit down. I really like writing out things by hand, and I'll just write sentence after sentence of what I think this piece might be and how it could respond to a given theme. And then in terms of the compositional process, I sketch and sketch and sketch. I'm really quite a slow worker. I love writing by hand. I love the physicality of writing music on paper. And I sketch out ideas in quite a methodical way, I guess. I'm writing lots of variations all the time. And although I've got an overall idea of what I want this piece to be, I try and then just let the ideas grow as they need to grow. So hopefully, the more I sketch, the more the ideas talk to each other a little bit and suggest other ideas or link in with each other. And so when things are going well, it becomes a sort of organic process of just observing what I'm doing and putting it in a certain direction.
Do you often start from the beginning and move forward, or do you sort of, does it change with piece to piece?
Yeah, never from the beginning. Often just from the middle outwards. Sometimes from the end, but yeah, mainly it's I just sort of throw myself in there, and I'm sort of just sort of in the dark trying to find find the objects that are in the room.
That's fascinating. That is such the opposite. Everything you have described so far is the opposite of what I do.
I envy though that you can sit down and know where you're going. Is that how it works for you?
Every time. I don't think I've ever successfully written a piece from the middle, or certainly not the end.
Does that make the process of composition any less stressful?
I don't know. It's just so fascinatingly different.
Yeah, yeah. And thank goodness, because otherwise we'd all sound the same, I guess.
Right, and this would all be completely pointless.
I feel like we should all try and have a go at some point of doing what someone else does, because it will probably be really creatively fruitful to do that. But maybe this year I should write a piece from the start.
And I'll dive in from the middle, and we'll report back.
Yes, yeah.
At what point do you transfer from being fully on paper to being in like a notation program?
It depends. If I'm writing a solo piece, then kind of at the end, I really try and avoid going to a computer. But if I'm writing something, that's involving more instruments, I kind of do a bit of both. So I'll spend a lot of time sketching, and then when I've got an idea that I think might be worth keeping, I'll put it on the computer. And so I just sort of patch things together like that. I suppose that's the way I tend to work. But I find I really need as I've said, that the physicality of writing stuff. I don't find that I can sketch very well on a computer. I've tried it, and I just get distracted.
Well, there's something about having everything directly in front of you that you can see the big picture, whereas on the computer there's a lot of scrolling involved unless you have a billion monitors. So I understand that.
Yeah, I'm sure there's also a technological way of doing this, but I heard something the other day. I really like listening to interviews with authors or filmmakers or whatever, because I think you can learn a lot as a composer from other disciplines. And I was listening to a podcast with the author Philip Pullman, and he said something about when he's writing, he'll cross something out in pencil so that he can still see it. If he's looking back, he can see he decided that he'd gone wrong, or where he decided to take another path. And I quite like that you can delete something on a piece of paper, but not quite delete it. And that can be helpful when you're going back to things and revisiting things. But I really like, if I've got the luxury of time, I really like to let ideas marinate. I like to write something else, in the same piece, but a contrasting part of the same piece, and then come back and see if anything's changed in my perception of what I've done. When things are going really well, I guess I'll be doing something else, and a part of the piece that I've not been thinking about for a couple of days will come to mind, and maybe an idea for it will occur. So it's really nice when there's the luxury of time to go back and forth between ideas. But I realize that's less about how you work and more just the working process in general, as opposed to whether it's paper or computer.
You've mentioned a lot about how you really like to take your time, and I think that's very interesting, because so much of maybe speaking for myself, but so much of the compositional life is based around deadlines, right? So how does your tendency to work slowly get affected by the looming deadline? Are you just very good at time management?
I think I try and just write a lot, if that makes sense. I try and write regularly so that the small ideas amount to something in time. And I have written pieces quite quickly. When I need to, I've been able to do it. But when I'm doing that, I just have days where I'm in a terrible mood. It's like all of the emotions of writing a piece get compressed into a short space of time. So you feel the elation, you feel the angst, and it's all there in a really short space of time. And it's just horrible. I find it horrible. But it's good to write quickly sometimes. I do recognize that, and as I say, I do it from time to time. But I like also, I guess, I like living with a piece of music as well. You know, it's nice to kind of have this thing that's accompanying you in your day-to-day life. But yeah, in terms of deadlines, you've just got to meet them, haven't you?
Right. So I've been asking this question, and I really am curious on how you respond to this. So, do you write music for yourself, your performers, or for your audience?
um, myself, but I think as someone who's performed a lot in the past, at least when I was younger, I'm always trying to write something that is going to be enjoyable to perform. Um, and always, if you know the people you're writing for, inevitably you end up writing a little bit for them too. Um, you know, so I've got to be happy with what I do first and foremost. I've got to like it. I find that I can't connect to a piece unless I'm, you know, really into what I'm doing. But you know, I'm writing a piece at the moment for a fantastic oboist here in the UK called Mary Noden, and you know, I've known her for a very long time, and my thoughts about the music are obviously tied up a little bit in, you know, can I imagine her playing this? So, but in terms of audience, no, I don't really think about them. I just think as a composer, you've got to be an honest audience for your music. So I think you've got to think about how your music's going to be perceived and how your music's going to make people, or how your music's going to be followed, I think. So I think you can have an eye on what's going to be, I think appealing is the wrong word for an audience, but engaging for an audience without pandering to the audience. I think that's an important distinction.
I love that. I love that because I feel like, you know, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but I feel like in my field of choral music is what I typically write my music in. There's a lot of what you said. You know, there's a lot of like there's a template that seems to be followed a lot that is designed to, you know, elicit a response from an audience. And yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you for saying what you said.
no, it's a really good. I mean, I was speaking to, yeah, to my old composition teacher about Hitchcock films a while ago, and how Hitchcock's got his eye on what the audience might be expecting, but then it's always about whether or not it subverts that or have a bit more. And so I think, you know, you can have a sort of dialogue with the audience, but I don't think you should necessarily just give them what they want. And I imagine it must be very difficult, you know, if you're writing in a field where that's the case, because you're having to work a lot harder, I guess.
Yeah, I write for the performers personally,
Sure.
and if it, you know, if they like it, then it's out of my hands, whether the audience likes it or not.
Sure. And also, you can never really second guess an audience either, can you? I mean, you can try, but it's often going to backfire if you do, I think.
What kind of advice can you give an emerging composer or emerging musical professional in general?
If I answer the composer side of things, is that okay?
Sure.
I wouldn't want to comment on, you know, what a violinist should be doing. But, no, I would say I kind of have a twofold piece of advice, and my first piece of advice would be that you should learn an instrument or sing in a way that allows you to play with other people and be part of either a choir or an ensemble. It doesn't really matter what level that choir or ensemble is. I think it's just important that as composers we understand what it's like to be on the other end of making music. I think it really is noticeable when you're watching a young composer working with a group of musicians and they haven't had the experience of playing. They maybe don't speak to the musicians as clearly or perhaps even as respectfully in extreme cases. And I think just having that experience of being on the other side is important and shapes how you write. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to write music that panders to the performer or is easy for the performer, but at least it should be considerate, I think, of what their abilities are and what their training is. And the other piece of advice, which is following on from that, because it's thinking about the performer, is make sure that you know how to notate your music well. I think one of the things I'm always saying to my orchestration students is you can have the most amazing idea, but if you're not communicating that idea clearly, it never goes beyond being an amazing idea, because people need to be able to take your intentions and understand what they are in order to do that. And if you're not notating your music clearly, and I know that sounds like a sort of banal thing to say and not particularly inspiring, it's quite practical, I guess, but I think so many rehearsals and performances are let down by a bad set of parts, for example.
No, I completely agree with you. I completely agree with you, because you have to describe your thoughts clearly, because a lot of the times you're not going to be able to actually meet with the people who are going to perform your music, so they have to. You can't expect them to read your mind.
Sure. Yeah, I guess in an ideal world, you're maybe going to people who you don't know. I mean, certainly for me, maybe some of the most satisfying things as a composer when someone writes to you and you've never met them before, and they say, "Oh, I've found this piece of yours and I'm playing this," and that's really lovely, because it's nice to know that the music's traveled. But if you've not notated it clearly, then it can't travel, because you have to be there to explain what you mean.
Exactly. So, do you have any cool projects coming up?
Yeah, I mean, the piece that I mentioned a few moments ago, this solo oboe piece, is something that I've been excited about writing for quite a while, actually, because well, it ties in to what we were saying about Italy earlier. Italian life and landscape and sounds are very important to me, but also I've developed a real interest in Italian literature. And the piece I'm writing, it's inspired by a text called The Tale of Tales, or Lo Conto degli Conti, which is a collection of literary fairy tales written in 17th century Neapolitan language. This is an incredible, collection of texts. It contains the earliest known versions of folk tales like Rapunzel, Cinderella, Puss in Boots. But throughout this text are references to music and musical practices at the time in 17th century Naples, because the author of the texts, a writer called Giambattista Basile, was the brother of a singer who, was one of the great singers of her day. So he was very, very switched on as to the role that music played. And so there were all these wonderful musical metaphors and musical descriptions in the text. And rather than responding to the stories, I'm responding in this piece to these musical metaphors and these musical descriptions. So that's something that as I say, I've been wanting to do this for a while, and this piece is the perfect vehicle for it. But I'm hoping down the road to take what is going to be a set of 5 short pieces for solo oboe and expand it, hopefully, into something like a concerto piece. So that's a long-term project.
When can we expect to hear the solo part?
The solo part, coming back to deadlines, is end of February. So
Okay.
imminent.
But that's, yeah, I love that idea of, you take something that you get a lot of mileage out of your material. So you write this piece for the solo instrument and then you expand it outwards. I think that's great.
Yeah, it's not something I've done before. I always had the thing, coming back to what you were saying earlier, you were asking about reinventing the wheel. Well, I've never tried to do that, but each piece I always felt I needed to come up with, brand new stuff. And I make a lot of sketches for something, set them to one side and never come back to them. But I've been a bit better recently about going through old sketches and saying, actually, there's something interesting here. Maybe this is the right time to make a piece out of it. And with this, I did so much reading for this piece. I read obviously all the folk tales and made this big list of all the musical descriptions which was in it. And it's a big book. And then, I read an analysis of the text. I read some of the you know, the original text in the 17th century Neapolitan, obviously with the English side by side. I invested so much preparation time for this that I didn't want to just leave it at something that would be like a 10-15 minute oboe piece. I thought, you know, it would be good to live with this for a bit longer and explore it more deeply, really.
Where can we find more of your stuff? And if you are a first time listener of your music, with what piece should you start with?
Well, most of my stuff is on my website, which is www.peterlongworthcomposer.com. There are either recordings or videos on the site or links on the site to other places where you can listen to these things. In terms of a first piece, I'd say that the piece I mentioned earlier called Nocturne and Masquerade is maybe the best place to start, in that it contains a lot of what I like exploring as a composer. So the first movement of the piece, it's a nocturne. It's entitled Nocturne with Bells. So we've got all these bell effects, which I mentioned always captivate me when I'm in Italy. And then the second movement, Masquerade, it's a very playful piece. It's very scherzo-like. So I think with these two contrasting movements, that piece probably sums up who I am and what I'm doing at the moment.
Peter, thank you so much for talking to me today. This is absolutely fantastic. And if you want to hear more of Peter's music, do visit his website. I'll have links down in the description below. If you have a question for Peter, please leave a comment. That would be great. And if you want to hear more of these episodes, do like the video and subscribe to the channel. And I will see you next time. Thank you so much, Peter.
Thank you very much indeed.